Kalis lived in the shadows of Falrith, a city built by the elves in their ancient glory. He was just a craftsman, no different from the hundreds of other humans who toiled under the watchful eyes of their elven masters. The city's tall, silver towers glittered in the sunlight, a reminder of the power that the elves had held for centuries. Humans like Kalis were nothing more than tools for their work, bound to serve them with no hope of ever rising above their station. It was in these streets, under the heavy weight of his daily tasks, that Kalis first heard the whispers. Whispers that spoke of something more, something hidden in the dark corners of the city. The humans, once kept in line through fear and force, were beginning to believe they could be more. They had begun to dream of freedom, of an end to their subjugation. One evening, Kalis found himself working late in the forge, the air thick with the smell of burning metal. The clang of his hammer against the anvil was the only sound in the empty workshop. He worked with purpose, focused on the task at hand. It was then, in the dim light, that he noticed something strange. Beneath the pile of old tools, something glittered faintly, catching his eye. Curious, Kalis bent down and reached for it. His fingers brushed against something smooth and cold, and as he pulled it free, the object revealed itself to be a small shard of crystal. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen. The shard pulsed with a strange energy, as though it held a power far beyond his understanding. As he held it in his hand, a feeling washed over him, not of fear, but of something else. Power, perhaps, or maybe something deeper, a connection to a past long forgotten. The shard slipped from his hand, its magic seeming to react to his touch, but it was only for a brief moment. The forge grew still, and Kalis felt a strange sensation in the air around him. He couldn't explain it, but it was as if the world itself had shifted. Without fully understanding what had just happened, Kalis tucked the shard into his pocket and continued his work. Yet something inside him stirred. This was no ordinary find, and he knew deep down that it was important. He couldn't explain why, but it felt as though this small piece of crystal held the key to something far greater than his simple life in the forge. The next day, rumors spread through the human workers in the city. There was talk of a mysterious object, of a spark of rebellion among the humans. Kalis didn't know it yet, but he had become part of something much larger. The shard he had found was no ordinary trinket. It was the beginning of a change that would challenge the very foundations of the Elven Empire. And Kalis, for the first time in his life, felt something new. Oh, the days that followed were filled with tension. Kalis could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. He worked quietly in the forge, trying to keep his head down, but every now and then he caught the eyes of other workers. They too were beginning to feel it. Whispers of rebellion, of rising up against their elven rulers, spread quickly among the humans. Kalis could see the change in their faces, a spark of something new, something daring. But he also saw the fear that came with the idea of defying the elves. The elves had ruled for centuries, their power unchallenged. No human had ever dared to rise against them. And yet Kalis couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing. One evening, as Kalis was leaving the forge, he was stopped by a man he barely knew, a fellow human named Thorn. Thorn was known for being quiet, often keeping to himself, but there was a certain intensity about him now, something different. "You have it, don't you?" Thorn asked, his voice low, as if he were afraid someone might overhear. Kalis didn't need to ask what Thorn meant. The shard, the object he had found in the forge. It had been in his pocket since that strange moment, but he had kept it hidden, unsure of its power or significance. "I don't know what it is," Kalis replied, glancing around nervously, "but it feels important." Thorn nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the area. "It is. You found something the elves will want to destroy. You need to be careful, Kalis. There are others who will stop at nothing to take it from you." Kalis felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known the elves were powerful, but this was different. Thorn wasn't speaking of ordinary guards or soldiers. He was talking about something deeper, something more dangerous. "Who else knows about it?" Kalis asked. "Not many," Thorn said, lowering his voice even more. "But that's changing. There are others who believe we can fight back, who believe we can win." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Kalis felt a surge of uncertainty. He had never thought of himself as a fighter, never imagined being part of something larger than himself. But the more he listened to Thorn, the more he felt a growing sense of purpose. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Kalis admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Thorn placed a hand on his shoulder, a firm but reassuring grip. "No one is born ready, but it's time for us to rise, Kalis. The elves think we're nothing. It's time to show them they're wrong. With that, Thornton walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Kalis standing alone, still holding the shard in his pocket. It wasn't just a piece of crystal. It was a key, a symbol of something much bigger than himself. Kalis couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. The city of Thalorith, once a place of silent submission, was now a place on the brink of change. A revolution was quietly stirring, and Kalis, whether he liked it or not, was at the heart of it. The next few days were filled with an uneasy silence. Kalis went about his work, but his mind was elsewhere, constantly turning over what Thorn had said. There was a weight to the shard in his pocket, a constant reminder that the world around him was changing. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The whispers, the quiet rebellion, it was happening, and he was a part of it, whether he was ready or not. One evening, as Kalis was working late in the forge, he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up, expecting it to be another worker, but instead, he saw Siltharion, the exiled Elven general. Kalis froze. The Elven general was a figure of both fear and legend. His armor was worn, his face weathered by years of exile, but his eyes were sharp, full of a wisdom that seemed to cut through the air itself. Siltharion didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You have the shard," he said, his voice low and steady. Kalis nodded, his heart racing. "How did you know?" "I've been watching," Siltharion replied, his gaze never leaving Kalis. "The elves may be powerful, but they are not all-seeing. I know what the shard is. I know what it can do." Kalis felt his hands tremble, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What is it? What does it do?" Siltharion stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It is no mere trinket. The shard is a key to something ancient, something hidden. It holds the power to open portals to places beyond our world. It is the very thing the elves fear most." Kalis swallowed hard. "But how do you know all of this?" Siltharion looked around the room, ensuring no one was listening. "I was once a general in the Elven army. I fought for their cause, but I grew disillusioned. The elves are not the noble, peaceful beings they claim to be. They have secrets, dark ones that they keep hidden from the rest of the world. That shard is part of those secrets, and if we can use it, we can change the balance of power." Kalis stared at Siltharion, his mind racing. He had always known the elves were powerful, but he never imagined they would have such deep, dark secrets. "So, what do you want from me?" Kalis asked, his voice shaking slightly. "I need you to come with me," Siltharion said, his tone firm. "We cannot defeat the elves alone. We need to gather others, those who are willing to fight back. Together, we can use the shard to free your people from the Elven reign." The weight of the decision hung heavily on Kalis. He had never imagined himself as a leader, never thought he could be the one to stand up to the elves. But something inside him stirred, a feeling he couldn't ignore. Maybe this was his chance. Maybe this was his moment. "I'm not a warrior," Kalis said quietly, "but I'll do whatever it takes to make sure the elves can't control us anymore." Siltharion nodded. "That's all I ask. Together, we will make sure the elves learn they are not invincible." With that, Siltharion turned and walked toward the door. Kalis stood there, staring at the shard in his hand. He had just taken the first step toward a battle he didn't fully understand, but one thing was clear. He was no longer just a craftsman. The world was changing, and Kalis was ready to fight for that change. The next day, Kalis met with Siltharion at dawn. The air was cool, the streets of Thalorith still quiet, as most of the city's inhabitants were asleep. Kalis had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. What had he gotten himself into? Siltharion was waiting for him by the city's outer gate, hidden in the shadows of the tall walls. His eyes were scanning the surroundings, ever alert, as though he expected trouble at any moment. "You're here," Siltharion said, his voice quiet but strong. "Good. We need to move fast." Kalis nodded, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He had no idea where this path would lead, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. "What's the plan?" "First," Siltharion said, "we need to find others who are willing to join us. We cannot take down the elves alone. There are groups, hidden across the city, who share our belief that the time for change has come. But they need someone to show them that it's possible." "Who are these people?" Kalis asked, his voice steady, though he could feel his heart racing in his chest. "Outcasts, those who have been pushed aside by the elves," Siltharion explained. "Not all elves support their rulers, but most are too afraid to speak out. The ones we'll find will be those who have nothing left to lose." They moved through the narrow streets, the early morning light slowly beginning to break through the dark sky. It was a strange feeling, walking through the city with a purpose. knowing that what they were about to do would change everything. For so long, humans had been nothing more than shadows in the elven world, invisible and ignored. But now, they were ready to rise. Soltharian led Kalis to an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. The door was old, the wood cracked and worn, but Soltharian pushed it open with ease. Inside, Kalis was met with a room full of faces, tired, worn faces, but eyes that burned with a fierce determination. These were the people who were willing to fight. Everyone, listen up, Soltharian called, his voice carrying through the room. This is Kalis. He has something that can change everything. If we're going to rise up against the elves, we need to stand together. The room grew quiet as Kalis stepped forward. He didn't know what to say, but the words came to him as if they had been there all along. We've lived under their rule for far too long, he began, his voice steady now. The elves think we're nothing, but we're more than that. We are capable of so much more. It's time we show them. There was a long silence. Then one by one, the faces in the room began to nod. There was fear in their eyes, yes, but there was something else too, hope. I don't know how this will end, Kalis continued, but I know this is the right thing to do. We can't live like this anymore. We have to fight for our future. A man at the back of the room, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward. You have our support, Kalis. We'll fight with you. The others murmured in agreement. The room buzzed with the energy of those ready to take a stand. Soltharian placed a hand on Kalis's shoulder. This is just the beginning. We have much more to do. Kalis nodded, feeling a new strength rise within him. He wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone. The fight had only just begun, but Kalis could feel deep in his bones that they had a chance now. And that was all he needed to know. The days that followed were filled with tension. Kalis and the group of rebels worked tirelessly to prepare for what was coming. They had gathered supplies, made plans, and trained as best they could. Every day, the city of Falorith seemed to grow heavier with the weight of their secret, the weight of revolution. Kalis spent most of his time with Soltharian, who seemed to know every hidden passage in the city, every quiet corner where the elves wouldn't think to look. The former general had been exiled years ago, but his knowledge of the Elven kingdom was invaluable. He knew the places where they could strike, the weaknesses in the Elven army, and the secrets that lay beneath the city. But even with all this knowledge, Kalis knew they were still outmatched. The elves were powerful, their magic was ancient, and their army was trained to fight with precision. The odds were against them, but the fire in Kalis's heart burned brighter every day. He could no longer imagine returning to the life he had once known, the life of submission and silence. The time had come for humans to stand up and fight. One evening, as Kalis was walking through a hidden alley with Soltharian, the older man stopped suddenly. Listen, he said, his voice tense. Kalis paused, straining his ears. At first, all he could hear was the usual sounds of the city, distant voices, the soft hum of life continuing on. But then he heard it, the faint clatter of metal, the sharp footsteps of soldiers approaching. Elven patrol, Soltharian muttered. They're getting closer. Kalis's heart raced. The patrols had grown more frequent in recent days. The elves had become suspicious, no doubt noticing the growing unrest among the humans. They were hunting for anyone who dared defy their rule. Soltharian quickly pulled Kalis into the shadows, pressing his back against the cold stone of the building. They waited in silence, listening as the patrol passed by, the soldiers unaware of their presence. Kalis's breath felt loud in his chest, but he forced himself to stay still, to blend into the darkness. Once the sound of the patrol had faded, Soltharian gave a small nod. That was too close. How do we stay ahead of them? Kalis asked, his voice low. We need to move fast, Soltharian said. The longer we stay in one place, the more likely they are to find us. We must strike soon. Kalis nodded, his mind racing. They didn't have much time. The longer the elves hunted them, the more lives would be lost. They had to act now. As the two men moved quickly through the narrow streets, Kalis felt a new determination settle within him. The city was full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. If they could outsmart the elves, if they could use their own rules against them, they might just have a chance. In the days that followed, Kalis and Soltharian continued to gather their allies, spreading the word of their cause. More and more humans joined their ranks, willing to take the risk, willing to fight for the freedom they had long been denied. Kalis wasn't sure what the future would hold, but one thing was clear. They had already begun to change the world, one small step at a time. The elves may have ruled for centuries, But the humans were no longer willing to stay silent. The time for change had come. The night before the planned attack, Kalis couldn't sleep. The weight of what was coming pressed down on him, and his thoughts kept racing. He lay on a rough mat in the back of the hidden building, listening to the muffled sounds of the other rebels moving about. Some were sharpening weapons, while others were preparing their gear. The air was thick with tension, and Kalis felt it deep in his bones. Soltharian had given them their orders. They would strike at dawn, catching the Elven patrols off guard. It was a risky move, but it was their best chance. Kalis had to admit he wasn't sure how they were going to pull it off. The elves were powerful, and their soldiers were skilled. Still, there was something inside him, a quiet voice that whispered, "This is the right thing to do." As the hours dragged on, Kalis rose to his feet, deciding to take a walk outside. He needed a moment to clear his mind. The cool air of the city greeted him as he stepped into the street. The city felt different tonight, quieter than usual. Maybe it was the calm before the storm, or maybe it was the strange sense of anticipation that hung in the air. He walked through the narrow streets, keeping to the shadows as he made his way to the edge of the city. The distant glow of the Elven towers loomed in the distance. From here, they looked so majestic, so untouchable. The city of Faloreth had been built to show off the Elven grandeur. Their towers reached high into the sky, and their magic was woven into the very stone of the city. The elves believed they were invincible, but Kalis knew better now. The elves might have their magic and their power, but the humans had something the elves had forgotten long ago: determination. He walked for a while, lost in thought, before he heard footsteps behind him. His heart skipped a beat, but he quickly turned to find Thorn, the quiet rebel who had first spoken to him. "Can't sleep either?" Thorn asked, his voice low. Kalis nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I keep thinking about tomorrow. We're outnumbered. The elves won't give up their power easily." Thorn smiled slightly, his eyes gleaming with a quiet strength. "We may be outnumbered, but we have something the elves don't. We have hope. And that's stronger than any magic." Kalis didn't say anything, but he felt the truth in Thorn's words. The elves had lived in their towers for so long, believing they were untouchable. They had forgotten the power of people who were willing to fight for their freedom, who had nothing left to lose. "Tomorrow," Thorn continued, "we show them that we are not afraid." Kalis took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. The time had come. Tomorrow, they would make their move. There was no turning back now. The two men stood together for a moment, both staring at the distant city. The towers of Faloreth seemed to loom over them, but Kalis no longer felt small. Tomorrow, the humans would rise, and they would fight for their future. With a final glance at the city, they turned back and walked toward their group. The rebellion was no longer just a dream. It was real, and it was about to begin. The first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting a soft glow across the city. Kalis stood in the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. The time had come. He glanced around at the group of rebels who had gathered in the alleyway. They were nervous but determined. Some clutched crude weapons they had made themselves, while others held torches or simple tools. But there was no mistaking the look in their eyes. They were ready to fight. Soltharian stepped forward, his face calm despite the tension. His eyes scanned the group, ensuring everyone was in position. "Remember," he said in a low voice, "we strike fast and leave no trace. The elves are powerful, but they are not invincible. We must make them realize that we will not be silenced." Kalis nodded, gripping the shard in his pocket. A small piece of ancient crystal was heavier than it had ever felt, its power humbling. It was the key to their rebellion, the symbol of everything they were fighting for. He had no idea what would happen if they succeeded or failed, but he knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back now. The group moved quickly through the narrow streets, their steps muffled by the soft morning mist. Every movement was calculated, every glance sharp with awareness. As they neared the Elven patrol route, the tension grew thick in the air. The elves were always so precise, so sure of their control, but they had never expected this. A ragtag group of humans, ready to fight back with nothing but their courage and the power of the shard. Kalis could feel the quiet hum of energy in the air as they approached the main road. The patrol was near, and soon they would be in position. He exchanged a glance with Thorn, who gave him a reassuring nod. The plan was simple: strike quickly, use the element of surprise, and take down the Elven soldiers before they could alert reinforcements. It was a gamble, but it was their only chance. The first sound of movement reached their ears. The Elven patrol just around the corner. Kalis's heart skipped a beat. He took a deep breath, calming his nerves. That was the time. Soltharian raised his hand, signaling for everyone to get into position. The rebels quickly scattered into the shadows, melting into the surroundings. Kalis crouched low behind a barrel, his breath coming faster now. The elves were close. He could hear their voices, soft and distant as they approached. The moment they turned the corner, the group attacked. With a shout, the rebels surged forward, taking the elven soldiers by surprise. Kalis moved quickly, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had no training in battle, but he was driven by the need to protect his people. He swung a blunt weapon he had grabbed earlier, knocking one of the elves to the ground. The battle was chaotic but quick. The elves were skilled, but they weren't prepared for the ferocity of the humans. As the last of the elven soldiers fell, Kalis stood, his breathing heavy. He looked around, meeting the eyes of the rebels. They had done it. "We've won this round," Soltharian said, his voice low but steady. "But this is only the beginning. We must keep moving. The elves will come for us, but we will be ready." Kalis nodded. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in his life, he felt hope. They had proven it. The humans could fight back, and they would keep fighting until they were free. The days after their first victory felt like a blur to Kalis. They had taken down the Elven patrol with surprising success, but the victory was short-lived. As they retreated to the hidden safe house, there was no time to celebrate. The reality of their actions sank in quickly. The elves would not let this go. Soltharian had already begun to make plans for their next move. He knew the elves would retaliate, but Kalis could see the determination in his eyes. The former general was not afraid. He had been in situations like this before, and now it was his experience that guided them through the chaos. "We must stay ahead of them," Soltharian said, looking at the map of Thalorith spread across the table. "We can't afford to be caught off guard again. The elves will come for us, but they don't know the city like we do." Kalis nodded, feeling a sense of purpose grow inside him. The rebellion had started small, with just a few brave souls, but now it was something more. Every day, more humans joined their cause, eager to fight for their freedom. They were stronger than ever, and with the shard in their hands, they had the power to change everything. The next few days were spent in constant motion. They moved through the city in secret, striking when the elves least expected it. The rebels attacked small outposts, sabotaged supply lines, and disrupted elven patrols. Each victory, no matter how small, sent a message. The humans were no longer weak. They were not afraid. Kalis was starting to understand the power of their unity. Each person in the rebellion played a role, from the youngest to the oldest, from the skilled fighters to those who worked behind the scenes, gathering information or crafting weapons. It was a team effort, and for the first time in his life, Kalis felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. But even with their success, the elves were closing in. Soltharian had warned them that the Elven High Council would not sit idly by. They were sending more soldiers, more powerful magic, to crush the rebellion before it could spread too far. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure was building. One evening, as Kalis stood at the edge of the city, looking out over the landscape, he felt the weight of the coming battle. The elves had always been in control, and now they were desperate to keep it. The rebellion had awakened something in the elven rulers: fear. "Are we ready?" Kalis asked, turning to Soltharian, who stood beside him, his expression calm but focused. "We will be," Soltharian replied, his voice steady. "But the real fight is just beginning. The elves won't stop until they've wiped us out." Kalis clenched his fists, the shard in his pocket pressing against his side. The humans had proven their strength, but they needed more. They needed a plan that would strike at the heart of the Elven Empire, something that would make the rulers realize they couldn't control everything. "Then we take the fight to them," Kalis said, his voice firm. "We go to the Elven stronghold." Soltharian's eyes narrowed, considering the suggestion. It was a bold move, but Kalis could see the spark of agreement in his eyes. It was time to end this. They would show the elves that humans were not to be underestimated. "Tomorrow we march," Soltharian said, a hint of pride in his voice. "We'll take the fight to their doorstep, and we won't stop until we've won our freedom." The rebels gathered around, and for the first time, Kalis saw no fear in their eyes, only determination. They were ready. The war for their future was about to begin.